That was good. I took a lot of notes and learned a lot of things there.
Yeah, me too. All kinds of great information. Thanks, Amelia.
Of course, you guys.
Have First, I have a couple questions, but the first thing I was going to ask is, you were mentioning EMDR is like the cards from the Dewey Decimal System.
Yeah.
Just flying out or coming out. Did you ever see the movie Ghostbusters?
Yes, that's where it's from. Maybe that's why. I watch Ghostbusters too much.
I want to see. I was looking up GIFs of that as you were talking because I was like, oh my gosh, that reminds me. It's how I feel sometimes is all the cards are flying out uncontrollably. I'll see if I can pop that in here when I edit.
I was going to say, I would love that. Love that to be added. Good idea.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks for correcting that. I hadn't realized that's what I was picturing.
That was a good movie. So I guess the first thing I want to ask, and I hope I'm not re-asking, I hope this wasn't asked earlier. If it is, just excuse me. How did you get into this? Like what sparked, what was the catalyst that got you into this field?
I started out as a child life specialist in the hospitals because I love working with kids. And in the hospital, everyone has a needle and is kind of the bad guy, except for the child life specialist who gets to blow bubbles and have toys. So like, I loved being the good guy, but more than that, I loved helping the kids. And I realized that you cannot help children unless you help their parents. And so went back to school, got some training, and then worked for the next 17 years on OB, labor delivery, NICU, seeing these traumas play out over and over and over again. And if you work in one place long enough, you start to see people come back with their second, third, fourth child. And you start to see the toll that some of these unrecognized traumas take, not just on the families of these women and their husbands, but also on the staff. So eventually I started trying to reach out and support in the aftercare realm of things post-hospital. And a big part of that was I was the director of a program for Intermountain called Angel Watch. And that's, okay, I'm not trying to advertise. So cut this out if you need to. That's a program for couples when they learn that their unborn child has a grave diagnosis and may not make it to delivery or for very long after. And seeing the loss, the impact that loss had, previous loss to that, and then also keeping in touch with them for, years and years after, seeing how the loss of their infant impacts future pregnancies and future relationships. Just cemented my desire to be in this reproductive health world.
Wow.
Sweet.
That's incredible. And maybe I'll reach out to them for a sponsorship or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Funny.
That's incredible. So the next thing I wanted to ask was, you were throwing out a lot of acronyms out there. And can you say what EMDR, what it stands for? And then I think you kind of explained what it is the cards coming up and stuff like that. And then you mentioned ART. So what does EMDR stand for?
That stands for the eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. So a mouthful of very pretentious sounding words, but also very descriptive. And then ART is accelerated resolution therapy, I believe. I just call it art.
Do you practice these or you're just aware of them? Okay.
No, I practice both.
She trains.
How would I go through EMDR? Can we go through a little mini session here?
You bet.
You mentioned mini. What?
Emphasis on mini.
On mini, okay. Because you mentioned something. Well, how does this even work? Because I can visualize the cards. Of course, Ghostbusters popped in my head. But how would somebody do that?
Well, there's actually 8 phases to EMDR. Most people think of just the eye movement back and forth as the EMDR. That's actually just one phase. That's phase 4. So the first phase is like rapport building. Second phase is finding kind of the story, looking for targets, like what are we going to work with here? But it's also doing a lot of grounding, making sure the client has what they need to be able to go into some of these difficult memories and be okay because they have the skills. And then we find the phase 3 is kind of a planning phase. We pick the image that represents the most disturbing part of the memory as a whole. And then there's almost always a negative core belief that goes with it, whether it's I'm not enough, it's my fault, I'm not safe, I can't trust anyone, I can only trust myself, I'll never be successful, or I can't stop bad things from happening, just something, but it's about themselves. So you take that, you pair it with the image, and you see where that thread takes you by doing the back and forth. And that back and forth can be, and some people use the eye movement, but some people prefer just little hand tappers. So a buzzer that taps in, that buzzes in this hand and then buzzes in this hand, like back and forth. And then you just kind of go, and it's amazing where the thoughts come.
That's fascinating. When you're mentioning that, it reminds me of, I've read some Jordan Peterson, and he talks about these epoch moments that can happen in people's lives. Would that be kind of what you're talking about? Like somebody picks a moment that was traumatic or really like sticks out in their head, and that's the moment they focus on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you just start there. That's just your jumping off point into the trauma. But that's your door. You go in through that door and then follow that thread of commonality of some sort to wherever it leads you. And very often it will lead you back to that time in 3rd grade where someone pushed you out of line getting a drink and your friend laughed at you. And that was the beginning of, I can't trust anyone and I'm not likable. And they are like, that's not true. Because I can think of that as an adult as, just complete hooey. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of removes that belief or that film, that filter from that. And it just starts generalizing forward till you get to the trauma to say, wait a minute, that wasn't my fault. I don't have to believe that anymore. I may have had something to do with it. I may have been able to make it better, but I don't have to feel that way about it anymore.
That's fascinating. It reminds me of something I went through. Sorry, go ahead and finish.
Oh, and then the next steps are really installing a positive belief about yourself and then doing a body scan to make sure your body's not storing any of that stress or that trauma still. And then kind of observing from where you were to where you came from.
Wow. That's, in the words of Marty McFly, that's heavy. That's really, really good. It's very illuminating. And like I said, it reminded me of an experience I had to go through where, not as intense, but this is very interesting to me, but just kind of going through my childhood and my past and just like grieving over moments. And then what I would consider is grieving over them like a wake at a funeral and then burying them. Mm-hmm. And then like you mentioned, I really liked how you mentioned, restoring dignity. Like I deserve better. That was not a good thing, but it wasn't my fault. I'm not a bad person. Mm-hmm. And kind of realizing that and growing from that moment.
Exactly. It just enables the post-traumatic growth to skyrocket and come about very naturally. And I love it. And there have been many times I've worked with people, especially young women of sexual trauma. I still don't know what happened to them because they never have to tell me. They never have to describe it. They never have to re-traumatize themselves or me by saying those words out loud. Can you picture that? And when I ask them, what are you noticing? They may say more ugly memories. And I say, okay, let's go with that. And I don't know what they are. I don't know who it was or where it happened, but they are better. And that's all I care about.
That's the whole point, huh?
That's amazing. Mm-hmm. And is ART similar to that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, ART is much. So when you're trained in ART, they make you sign this non-disclosure that you'll never like reveal the secret type thing. That's not very, Like you won't talk about it with people that aren't trained in ART.
Okay.
But it's similar in that you come up with that kind of core target. But as you replay it, you just replay it a few times, and they have you focus on different things when you replay it through your mind. And then you get to a point where you just kind of say, there's all these other cards in there. Let's just put them all in a box without reading what they are and just get rid of them. And for some people, that works really well because they don't want to go through that thread and see the connection between everything. They really just want to kind of dump it and move it over. And people walk out of here feeling much better about it.
That's interesting.
So satisfying.
I'm more the person who wants to know, like, where's the gear and what is it moving, so I can see it affecting other things. But I can understand that there's other people too who just like, okay, I identified it and it's gone.
It's done.
Yep. Kind of a quick release versus we're going to detail all of it.
Yeah. Do you have more time, or I really liked how your comment about we are beings of connection, and we experience trauma that we often feel alone, and that groups really help us realize, no, we're not alone in this. Other people have experienced this, and they can share that experience with others, and then kind of learn from other people and interact. That was just a kind of a comment I wanted to make that really resonated with me. That I thought was really good.
Yeah.
Ghostbusters really.
I haven't always given a lot of credit to groups, quite frankly, Amelia, to a fault. I haven't as a therapist. And so I really appreciate you bringing that to the forefront of our conversation today, how important that connection is. Even though our hurts may be different, our traumas might be a little different, even if it might be around fertility, let's say, we can all relate.
We can in some way. And just to be able to know you're not crazy. The response, or maybe your wife's not crazy. Look at all the other wives. They're doing the same thing. So don't worry about her so much. She's just like these others in these actions and these feelings. Or the dad saying, your wife's doing this too. All right. These are my people. So if I feel like unloading, great. And if not, let's go shoot some hoops. I'm a bigger proponent of sharing feelings, but a lot of people work out their grief and their frustrations in a kinesthetic manner. Working out, building something. I truly believe that DIY projects were born of grief. If you know something heavy's coming, you should make a little honey-do list for your partner, and you'll come home and it'll all be done because he's working out so many of those difficult, tricky feelings by creating something, by changing something, because you can't change what you're going through. So you can change your environment.
I have a lot of DIY projects around this house.
Yeah. You got a thing going on here too.
Yeah.
This was great. I wanted to ask, you mentioned that over basically across all genres of life and economic status and stuff like that, that about 15% of couples experience infertility. Do you know what the percentage breakdown is between like men who are maybe sterile, or women who are not infertile, or whatever it might be?
I don't know what those breakdowns are. I know that the number jumps significantly in your mid to late 30s.
That was another question I was going to ask, if there's an age correlation or anything. There
is an age correlation, and I wish I knew the answer off the top of my head. There was a report that came out this past spring from the World Health Organization that kind of details, here's your typical infertility rates, and here is your infertility rates broken down by age group. And as one would expect, the older you get, the higher those infertility rates.
Now, speaking of that, given Western culture and some of its shifts that we've seen recently, is it a growing issue in Western culture because people are putting off marriage and childbearing to later and later years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It's not just because we're coming up with these answers and these treatments, which is fantastic. It's that because of natural causes that we know we can manage, a lot of people can feel more comfortable putting it off because that biological clock just got set back. You have more time. As long as you have insurance, you can try this, blah, 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 fill in the blank.
So technology is advancing to a point where that's becoming less of an issue, the age?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, that's what we say. We'll see. I'm a big believer in wait 10 years and see what the results are.
Yeah, that's true. Because after something's been practiced for a while, you'll start seeing where the bugs in the system might be.
Yeah.
This has been great conversation. I could talk more and more, but I don't want to keep you any longer. And
thank you.
I can cut it here, or if you guys have any more questions.
That has been super helpful. We appreciate it so much, Amelia, for taking time to.
You're well suited for what you're doing, Amelia. I think you're a perfect fit.
Thanks for joining us today. Hey, do us a favor and take a second to subscribe to our podcast and the Utah Marriage Commission YouTube channel at Utah Marriage Commission, where you can watch this and every episode of the show. Be sure to smash the like button, leave a comment, and share this episode with a friend. You can also follow and interact with us on Instagram at Stronger Marriage Life and Facebook at Stronger Marriage. So be sure to share with us which topics you loved or which guests we should have on the show next. If you want even more resources to improve your marriage or relationship connection, visit strongermarriage.org, where you'll find free workshops, e-courses, in-depth webinars, relationship surveys, and more. Each episode of Stronger Marriage Connection is hosted and sponsored by the Utah Marriage Commission at Utah State University. And finally, a big thanks to our producer, Rex Polanis, and the team at Utah State University, and you, our audience. You make this show possible. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the Utah Marriage Commission.